I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Deborah Mitchell's face go pale at the quarterly HOA meeting. My name is Grant Kowalski, and I had lived in the Willow Creek Estates community in Scottsdale, Arizona for 8 years. It was one of those sprawling suburban developments with cookie-cutter houses, manicured lawns, and an HOA that seemed to have an opinion about everything from mailbox colors to the exact shade of beige your curtains could be. I'd always been the type to keep my head down, pay my dues, and avoid the drama that seemed to follow homeowner associations like flies to honey. But that night in March, everything changed. The meeting was being held in the community center, a building that the HOA constantly reminded us cost $2 million to construct. About 40 homeowners had shown up, which was actually a decent turnout. Most people came because they wanted to complain about something: a neighbor's tree blocking their view, someone parking an RV on the street, the usual suburban grievances. I was there because I had questions about our reserve fund. See, I worked as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in Phoenix. Numbers were my life. I could spot irregularities in financial statements the way a mechanic could hear a bad engine. And for the past 6 months, something about our HOA's financial reports had been bothering me. The numbers just did not add up. Deborah Mitchell was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman with helmet hair, the color of dishwater blonde, and a perpetual expression that suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. She had held her position for 5 years, ruling over our community with an iron fist wrapped in passive-aggressive emails. Her vice president was Linda Carson, equally middle-aged and equally convinced that her opinions were divine law. Rounding out the board were Treasurer Kenneth Huang and Secretary Pamela Rodriguez. "We will now move to the financial report," Deborah announced, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that HOA presidents seemed to develop. She adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at her notes. "I am pleased to report that our operating budget is in excellent shape. We have maintained our landscaping, completed necessary repairs, and our emergency reserve fund stands at a healthy $420,000. That number made my stomach drop. I had been tracking our reserve fund contributions for years, ever since I had automated my personal finance tracking system and decided to include HOA data just for the hell of it. According to my calculations, our reserve fund should have been sitting at approximately $760,000. I raised my hand. "Deborah, can I ask a question about that figure?" She looked at me with the kind of expression a teacher gives a student who is asked to use the bathroom during a test. "Grant, we have a lot to cover tonight. Can it wait until the end?" "It is about a $340,000 discrepancy in the emergency reserve fund," I said, keeping my voice calm. "So no, I do not think it should wait." The room went silent. Every head turned to look at me, and I could feel the weight of their attention. Deborah's face, as I mentioned, went pale. Linda Carson, sitting next to her, straightened in her chair like someone had just shocked her with electricity. "I do not know what you are talking about," Deborah said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "Our books are audited every year by a certified accountant. Everything is in perfect order." I pulled out my laptop from my bag. I had come prepared, though I had not expected to make this confrontation quite so public. "I have been tracking our reserve fund contributions for the past 8 years. Every homeowner pays $300 per year into the emergency reserve. We have 287 homes in this community. That is $85,100 per year going into reserves." I pulled up my spreadsheet and turned the laptop so people nearby could see. 8 years ago, when I moved in, our reserve fund had $212,000. With no withdrawals and consistent contributions, we should have approximately $892,000, accounting for the initial balance. Even with conservative estimates in the major roof repair on this building 3 years ago that cost about $130,000, we should still have at least $760,000. Deborah stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is inappropriate. You cannot just throw around accusations. I am not accusing anyone of anything," I interrupted, though we both knew that was exactly what I was doing. "I'm asking for clarification on a significant discrepancy in our community's finances. As a homeowner who pays into this fund, I have every right to ask these questions." A man in the back. Robert something, I could not remember his last name, called out. I want to hear the answer too. That is a lot of money. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Deborah looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Kenneth Huang, the treasurer, was suddenly very interested in his phone. Pamela Rodriguez looked genuinely confused, which made me think she might not have been in on whatever was happening. Our accountant can explain this, Linda Carson said, jumping to Deborah's defense. There are complex calculations involved. You cannot just do simple math and expect to understand HOA finances. That statement alone told me everything I needed to know. HOA finances were not rocket science. They were actually quite straightforward. Money comes in, money goes out, and you keep track of both. The fact that they were trying to make it sound complicated meant they were hiding something. The anti-pedophile. Then, let me see the detailed financial records, I said. The Arizona Planned Communities Act gives homeowners the right to inspect association records. I would like to request copies of all bank statements, receipts for major expenditures, and the complete audit reports for the past 8 years. Deborah's expression hardened. You need to submit that request in writing. Fine, I said, pulling out my phone. I am emailing it to you right now. I typed out a formal request while the room waited in tense silence. There, sent. According to state law, you have 10 business days to provide those records. The meeting fell apart after that. Deborah tried to move on to other business, but nobody cared about lawn maintenance schedules or the debate over whether to install new playground equipment. Everyone wanted to talk about the missing money. People clustered in groups, whispering and speculating. I noticed Deborah and Linda leave quickly through a side door, their heads bent together in urgent conversation. I went home that night with a knot in my stomach. I just made myself a very large target. And I knew from experience that people who stole money did not take kindly to being exposed. But I also knew I could not let this go. $340,000 was not some minor accounting error. That was serious money, stolen from the 287 families who lived in Willow Creek Estates. My wife, Sarah, was still awake when I got home, reading on the couch. How was the meeting? She asked. I think I just accused the HOA board of embezzlement, I said, dropping my keys on the counter. She set down her book. You think, or you did? I definitely did. Sarah was not surprised. She had listened to me complain about the financial discrepancies for months. What happens now? I requested all their financial records. They have to give them to me by law. Once I have those, I will know for sure whether my calculations are right. And if they are? Then we have a serious problem. The next morning, I woke up to find 3 emails from Deborah Mitchell. The first was a formal acknowledgement of my records request. The second was a thinly veiled threat about making unfounded accusations that could result in legal action against me. The third was a copy of a message she had sent to the entire community, painting me as a troublemaker who was disrupting the harmonious functioning of our HOA. I forwarded all 3 emails to my personal account and started a dedicated folder for what I was already thinking of as the HOA case. I had learned over my career that documentation was everything. Every email, every conversation, every piece of evidence needed to be preserved and organized. I spent the weekend building a more comprehensive spreadsheet. I went through every HOA newsletter we had received, every annual report, every assessment notice. I cross-referenced contribution amounts, dates, and any mentioned expenditures. The picture that emerged was damning. For the first 3 years of Deborah's tenure as president, the finances looked normal. The reserve fund grew steadily, expenditures were reasonable and well documented. Then, in year 4, things started to change. The reports became vaguer. Miscellaneous repairs started appearing as line items. The reserve fund balance stopped growing at the rate it should have. I made a list of specific questions I wanted answered. Where did the money for emergency landscaping expenses totaling $42,000 go? What were the unforeseen structural repairs that cost $68,000? Why were there multiple entries for legal consultations adding up to $37,000 when we had not been involved in any lawsuits? On Tuesday, 5 days after my initial request, I received a call from an unknown number. Mr. Kowalski? This is Patricia Freeman from Freeman and Associates. I am the accounting firm that handles the Willow Creek Estates HOA. Yes, hello, I said, putting her on speaker so I could take notes. Deborah Mitchell contacted me about your records request. I wanted to reach out to clarify some things before you receive the documents. HOA accounting can be complex, and I do not want you to be confused by what you see. I am a forensic accountant, I said flatly. I think I can handle it. There was a pause. Oh, I see. Well, then you will understand that there are various legitimate reasons for fund fluctuations, market variations, unexpected expenses, necessary reallocations. Ms. Freeman, are you calling to explain the $340,000 shortfall in the emergency reserve fund? Another pause, longer this time. I'm calling to offer my assistance in understanding the financial statements. Then you can help me understand this. According to Arizona law, reserve funds can only be used for their designated purpose. Emergency reserves cannot be moved to operating accounts without a vote of the membership. Were there any such votes in the past 8 years? I would need to check the meeting minutes, she said, but her tone told me she already knew the answer. So would I said. Which is why I requested those as well. I appreciate your call, Ms. Freeman, but I think I would rather review the documents myself first. If I have questions after that, I will be in touch. I hung up before she could respond. The fact that the accountant was calling me directly meant Deborah was panicking. Good. People made mistakes when they panicked. The financial records arrived on the 9th business day, 1 day before the legal deadline. They came in the form of a massive PDF file over 800 pages of scanned documents. This was clearly an attempt to overwhelm me with data, hoping I would give up or miss something important. What they did not know was that this was literally what I did for a living. I spent the next week going through every page. I created a database to track every transaction, categorizing them by type, date, amount, and whether they had proper documentation. I looked for patterns, irregularities, anything that stood out. What I found was worse than I had expected. The embezzlement had been systematic and sophisticated. It started small, a few $1,000s here and there, disguised as legitimate expenses. Inflated invoices for services that were either never performed or were wildly overpriced. Consulting fees paid to companies that existed only on paper, receipts that had clearly been altered or fabricated. But the largest chunk of the missing money had disappeared through a scheme involving the reserve fund transfers. Every year, Deborah had authorized the movement of funds from the emergency reserve to the operating account, claiming they were needed for urgent repairs or unexpected maintenance. She would then create fake invoices for work that was never done or pay real vendors inflated amounts and pocket the difference. I found payments to a company called Sunset Property Services totaling $173,000 over 4 years. When I looked up Sunset Property Services, I discovered it was registered to one Deborah Lynn Mitchell. She had been paying herself from HOA funds for services her company supposedly provided, except there was no evidence any work had actually been done. There were payments to Desert Consulting Group for management advisory services, $68,000 over 3 years. Desert Consulting Group was registered to Linda Marie Carson. The treasurer, Kenneth Huang, appeared to have received kickbacks through inflated invoices from his brother's landscaping company. The real cost of services was probably half of what the HOA was being charged, with Kenneth and his brother splitting the difference. Only Pamela Rodriguez, the secretary, seemed to be uninvolved. Her signature appeared on meeting minutes, but she had no check-signing authority and no apparent financial benefit from the scheme. I sat back in my chair and stared at my computer screen. This was not just a simple case of someone dipping into the cookie jar. This was organized fraud involving at least 3 board members spanning multiple years, totaling more than $340,000. I needed to decide what to do next. I could take this to the police immediately, but I wanted to make sure my case was airtight. I could present it to the HOA membership first, but that might give Deborah and the others time to destroy evidence or flee. I could hire a lawyer, but that would cost money and time. I decided to do something I probably should have done from the beginning. I called a friend who was an FBI agent. Trevor Moss and I had gone to college together, and while we only saw each other a few times a year, we had stayed close. He worked in the white-collar crime division. "Grant, how are you?" Trevor answered on the second ring. "I am good, but I have stumbled into something I think you might be interested in." "This is not another one of your conspiracy theories about grocery store loyalty cards, is it?" That was one time, and I still think something weird was going on with those points. "No, this is serious. I have evidence of embezzlement, over $300,000, stolen from my homeowner association over several years." Trevor's tone changed immediately. "Tell me everything." I spent the next hour walking him through what I had discovered. I sent him copies of my analysis and the source documents. He listened without interrupting, and I could hear him typing notes as I talked. "This is solid work," he said when I finished. "But HOA embezzlement usually falls under local jurisdiction unless there is mail fraud, wire fraud, or it crosses state lines. Do any of these transactions involve wire transfers?" "Almost all of them. The HOA operates through online banking. Every fraudulent payment was made electronically." "That gives us wire fraud. What about the vendors they were paying? Any of them out of state?" I pulled up my spreadsheet. "Yes, several. There's a consulting firm in Nevada that received $42,000. I would bet money it does not actually exist." "That gives us interstate commerce?" "Okay, this is potentially federal. But here's what I need you to do. Do not confront anyone else. Do not tell anyone what you have found except your wife. I'm going to connect you with someone in our Phoenix office who handles these cases. They will want to interview you and review your evidence. Can you come to the Phoenix field office tomorrow?" "Absolutely." "Grant, I am serious about not telling anyone. If these people know you are building a case, they will destroy evidence. They might have already started after you made your records request." "I understand. And be careful. People do stupid things when they are backed into a corner." That warning turned out to be prophetic. The next day, I drove to the FBI field office in Phoenix. I met with Special Agent Jennifer Wu, a sharp woman in her late 30s who specialized in financial crimes. I spent 3 hours going through everything with her. She asked detailed questions, made copies of all my documents, and took extensive notes. "This is excellent work," she said, echoing Trevor's assessment. "You have essentially built our case for us. But we need to verify everything independently and gather additional evidence. I'm going to open an investigation. In the meantime, you need to act like nothing has changed. Go to HOA meetings if there are any. Respond to emails normally. Do not give any indication that you know the full extent of what is happening." "How long will the investigation take?" "Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be months. We will need to subpoena bank records, interview potential witnesses, possibly set up surveillance. Financial crimes take time to prosecute properly." I left the FBI office feeling both relieved and anxious. Relieved that professionals were now handling this, anxious about having to pretend everything was normal while knowing what I knew. That weekend, I got a letter from the HOA's attorney. It informed me that I was being fined $200 for maintaining an unsightly yard condition. I walked outside and looked at my yard. It was perfect grass mowed, edges trimmed, no weeds, no trash. The letter specified that my decorative yard elements were in violation of the community's aesthetic standards. The only decorative element in my yard was a small ceramic gnome my daughter had bought me for Father's Day. It was maybe 8 inches tall and sat near the front door. This was retaliation, pure and simple. I took photos of my yard from multiple angles, time stamped and dated. Then I walked around the neighborhood and photographed at least 20 yards that had far more elaborate decorations, garden flags, statuary, bird baths, decorative rocks. None of those homeowners had received fines. I sent a formal appeal of the fine to the HOA, citing selective enforcement and requesting evidence of my violation. I kept my tone professional and gave no indication I was documenting their harassment. 2 days later, I got another letter. This time, I was being fined for parking my car on the street overnight, which was supposedly prohibited. Except my car had been in my garage all week because it was in the shop and I had been driving a rental. I had security camera footage proving my car had not been on the street. I sent that to the HOA along with another appeal. Deborah was getting desperate, which meant Agent Wu was right. I needed to be careful. The following week, there was an emergency HOA meeting called to discuss community security concerns. I attended, sitting in the back and keeping quiet. Deborah announced that due to concerning behavior by certain residents, the board was implementing new security measures. These included limiting access to HOA records, requiring board approval for any document requests beyond basic financial summaries, and authorizing the board to take legal action against residents who made false accusations against board members. Everything she was proposing was illegal under Arizona law, but most of the homeowners in the room did not know that. A few people raised objections, but Deborah steamrolled over them. The vote passed because only about 30 people had shown up, and several of them were clearly allies of the board. I said nothing, just took notes and recorded everything on my phone. After the meeting, a woman I had seen around the neighborhood approached me in the parking lot. "Are you Grant Kowalski?" "Yes." "I am Michelle Roberts. I live on Saguaro Drive. I just wanted to say that I think what you are doing is important. I've always thought something was fishy with our finances, but I did not know how to prove it." "I appreciate that," I said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "But you should be careful about being seen talking to me. The board is not happy with me right now." "I do not care. Deborah Mitchell is a bully and a thief. If you need anything, testimony, documentation, whatever, let me know." She handed me a business card with her phone number and walked away. I tucked the card in my pocket, feeling grateful that at least some people in the community had not drunk the Kool-Aid. Over the next month, the harassment escalated. I received 6 more violation notices for increasingly absurd things. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black. My trash cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection. My doormat was not an approved style. On and on it went. Each time I documented everything, appealed the fines, and sent copies to Agent Wu. She told me the investigation was progressing but could not give me details. Then, in early May, things took a darker turn. I came home from work to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart started pounding. I knew I had locked it that morning. I was obsessive about security. I stood on the porch for a moment, trying to decide what to do. Call the police, go in and check, wait for Sarah to get home. I called 911 and waited on the lawn until the Scottsdale police arrived. 2 officers cleared the house and then asked me to check if anything was missing. Everything looked normal at first. The TV was still there, Sarah's jewelry was untouched, my laptop sat on my desk. Then I went into my home office and my stomach dropped. The file cabinet where I kept hard copies of all my HOA documentation was open. The folders were gone. "They took files," I told the officer, "financial records related to an ongoing investigation." "An investigation?" I explained the situation, the HOA embezzlement, the FBI investigation, the recent harassment. The officer's expression grew more serious as I talked. "Do you have copies of those documents?" "Yes, everything is backed up digitally. The originals are with the FBI, but this is breaking and entering. Actually, there is no sign of forced entry. Do you know anyone who has a key to your house?" I thought about it. No one except our neighbors, the Hendersons, and they are in their 70s. They are definitely not breaking into houses. The officer took a report, gave me a case number, and told me to call if I thought of anything else. After they left, I did a more thorough check of the house. Nothing else was missing, but I had the creeping feeling that someone had been through all my things. Drawers that were usually neat looked slightly disturbed. Papers on my desk were not quite in the right order. I called Agent Wu and told her what happened. "We need to move faster," she said. "If they are willing to break into your house, they might be willing to do worse. I'm going to see if we can accelerate the timeline on some of our subpoenas. In the meantime, I want you to consider staying somewhere else for a few days. This is my home. I'm not going to let them drive me out. Grant, I understand, but no, I appreciate the concern, but running away is not going to help. If anything, it will signal that I am scared. I'm going to install additional security cameras and change my locks, but I am staying." She did not like it, but she accepted my decision. I spent that evening installing a comprehensive security system, cameras covering every angle of the house, motion sensors, the works. I changed all the locks and installed deadbolts that could only be opened from the inside. I was not taking any chances. 2 days later, Michelle Roberts called me. "Grant, I thought you should know. Deborah came to my house this morning and asked if I had been talking to you." What did you say? I told her it was none of her business who I talked to. Then she said that you were spreading lies about the board and that I should be careful about associating with you because you might be mentally unstable. She said I was mentally unstable. Her exact words were, showing signs of paranoid delusion. She is trying to discredit you to the whole neighborhood. I've gotten calls from 3 other people saying she's been making the rounds, warning people about you. This was a classic tactic attack the messenger's credibility rather than address the message. It would not hold up in court, but it could turn the community against me, which would make my life miserable. Thanks for the heads up, I said. There is something else. I've been doing some digging of my own. Remember how we had that big assessment 2 years ago for the pool renovation? Yeah, everyone had to pay an extra $800. Right. Well, I went to the pool the other day and really looked at it. Grant, I do not think they renovated anything. The tiles are the same, the pump is the same, even the diving board is the same one that was there when I moved in 6 years ago. I think that whole renovation was fake. How much did that assessment raise? With 287 homes at $800 each, about $230,000? I felt sick. That is not included in the $340,000 I calculated. That would be in addition to it. Jesus, how much did they actually steal? I do not know, but I'm going to find out. I spent that night reviewing the pool renovation documentation in the records I had received. There were invoices from a company called Arizona Pool and Spa Solutions for $218,000 in renovation work. The invoices were detailed retiling, new pumps, resurfacing, new filtration system, updated lighting. I looked up Arizona Pool and Spa Solutions. The company existed, had a legitimate website, and seemed to do real work. I called them the next morning. Arizona Pool and Spa, this is Derek speaking. Hi Derek, my name is Grant Kowalski. I'm calling about some work your company supposedly did for the Willow Creek Estates HOA about 2 years ago. Okay, let me pull up our records. Willow Creek Estates. Yeah, we have you in the system. What is your question? Can you tell me what work was done? Looks like it was a consultation. We sent someone out to assess the pool and provide an estimate for renovation work. Wait, you did not actually do the renovation? No, sir. According to our notes, we provided a quote of about $220,000, but the HOA decided not to move forward with the work. We billed them for the consultation fee, which was $1,200. Do you have a copy of that invoice? I can email it to you if you are an authorized representative of the HOA. I am a homeowner and member of the HOA. I can provide proof if needed. That works. Give me your email. 5 minutes later, I had the invoice. $1,200 for a consultation dated about 2 weeks before the HOA announced the pool renovation project. Someone had taken that invoice and fabricated a new one for $218,000. I forwarded everything to Agent Wu with a note. The pool renovation was fake. They collected an additional $230,000 in special assessments and never did the work. Total theft is probably over $500,000. She called me 10 minutes later. We are executing search warrants tomorrow. Can you be available to help identify documents if needed? Absolutely. The next morning, I watched from my driveway as FBI agents descended on Deborah Mitchell's house. They had search warrants for her home, Linda Carson's home, Kenneth Huang's office, and the HOA Community Center. I saw Deborah being escorted out of her house in handcuffs, her face red and furious. Linda was crying as they loaded her into an FBI vehicle. Agent Wu came by my house later that afternoon. We found evidence of systematic fraud going back 6 years. Fabricated invoices, shell companies, falsified financial reports, the whole thing. We also found evidence that Deborah and Linda were planning to disappear. They had flight reservations to Mexico for next week. Are you serious? Completely. They knew the walls were closing in. Your break-in was them trying to find out how much you knew. We found your stolen files in Deborah's garage, by the way. She thought if she could discredit you and destroy your evidence, they could ride it out. What happens now? They will be charged with wire fraud, mail fraud, theft, and probably a few other things. Kenneth Huang is cooperating in exchange for a lighter sentence. Pamela Rodriguez was genuinely uninvolved. She had no idea what was happening. The accountant, Patricia Freeman, was negligent but not criminal. She's going to lose her license, but she will not face charges. How much did they actually steal? Our preliminary estimate is $573,000, though that number might go up as we dig deeper. Between the reserve fund, the fake pool renovation, inflated contracts, and various other schemes, they bled this community dry. Over the following weeks, the full scope of the fraud came to light. Deborah Mitchell, Linda Carson, and Kenneth Huang had been systematically looting Willow Creek Estates for 6 years. They had created shell companies, fabricated invoices, inflated contracts, and stolen special assessment funds. The total amount exceeded $600,000 once federal investigators finished their accounting. The 3 of them were indicted on multiple felony counts. Deborah and Linda were denied bail after prosecutors presented evidence of their planned flight to Mexico. Kenneth was released on bail after agreeing to testify against the others. The story made local news, then regional news, then briefly hit the national news as an example of HOA corruption. Reporters called my house asking for interviews. I declined most of them, but I did agree to speak with one investigative journalist who was doing a deeper piece on HOA fraud across the country. The community was in chaos. The board had to be dissolved and a new emergency board elected. I was asked to serve as treasurer, which I accepted reluctantly. We had to hire forensic accountants to fully untangle the finances and figure out exactly where all the money had gone. The good news was that we were able to recover some of the stolen funds. The FBI seized Deborah's house, her car, and various bank accounts. Linda's assets were similarly frozen. Kenneth's assets were smaller, but they were also seized. Between asset forfeiture and insurance claims, we eventually recovered about $400,000. The bad news was that we still had a significant shortfall, and the emergency reserve fund was effectively empty. The new board had to make some hard decisions about special assessments to rebuild the reserves and cover necessary repairs that had been deferred while the previous board was stealing money. In September, 8 months after I first raised questions at that HOA meeting, the criminal trial began. I testified about how I discovered the discrepancies and what I had found in the financial records. The prosecution walked the jury through the various schemes, showing how Deborah, Linda, and Kenneth had systematically defrauded the community. The defense tried to paint it as innocent mistakes and poor accounting rather than intentional fraud. That argument fell apart when prosecutors presented evidence of the shell companies, the fabricated invoices, and the planned flight to Mexico. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Deborah Mitchell was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution of $342,000. Linda Carson received 10 years and was ordered to pay $218,000 in restitution. Kenneth Huang, because of his cooperation, received 5 years and was ordered to pay $73,000 in restitution. I sat in the courtroom when the sentences were handed down, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice had been served, sadness that it had come to this at all. These were people who had been entrusted with managing our community, and they had betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way. After the trial, life slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board operated with radical transparency. All financial records were posted online. All meetings were recorded and made available to residents, and we implemented a requirement for independent audits by different accounting firms each year. We also established a resident oversight committee to review finances quarterly. Michelle Roberts joined the board as secretary and became one of my closest allies in rebuilding trust in the HOA. Pamela Rodriguez, the former secretary who had been uninvolved in the fraud, offered to help however she could and became an advocate for HOA reform at the state level. As for me, I went back to my regular life, though I was now known throughout the neighborhood as the guy who caught the embezzlers. Some people treated me like a hero. Others seemed to resent me for disrupting their comfortable ignorance. I tried not to care either way. The experience taught me several important lessons. First, trust but verify. Just because someone is elected to a position of authority does not mean they are trustworthy. Second, numbers do not lie, but people do. My background in forensic accounting gave me the tools to spot the fraud, but anyone could have done it if they had simply paid attention to the basic math. Third, sunshine is the best disinfectant. The fraud was only possible because the HOA operated with minimal transparency and oversight. One evening, about a year after everything started, I was sitting on my front porch watching the sunset when Sarah came out and sat next to me. "You never talk about it anymore," she said. "Talk about what?" "The whole HOA thing. The investigation, the trial, all of it." I thought about that. "I guess because it is over. Deborah and Linda are in prison. The money is being recovered. The community is moving forward." But it must have been stressful living through all that. It was. There were times I thought about just letting it go, pretending I had never noticed the discrepancies. It would have been easier. Why did you not? Because it was not my money they were stealing. It was everyone's money. All the families in this community who were paying their dues and trusting that the board was acting in their best interests. Those people deserved someone to stand up for them. Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder. "I am proud of you." "Thanks. Though I think I am done with HOA politics for a while. Let someone else deal with the drama." She laughed. "Sure, until you notice something else that does not add up." She was probably right. I could not help myself. It was just how my brain worked. But for now, I was content to let others handle the community's finances while I focused on my own life. The ceramic gnome that had caused one of my first retaliatory fines still sat by my front door. I had thought about moving it, but decided to leave it there as a reminder. A reminder that small things mattered, that details were important, and that standing up for what was right sometimes meant taking risks. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt at peace. The emergency reserve fund was being rebuilt, the community was healing, and 3 people who had betrayed the public trust were facing the consequences of their actions. It was not a perfect ending, but it was a just one. The final chapter of the saga came 2 years later, when we received notification that additional funds had been recovered through the sale of Deborah Mitchell's investment properties that federal investigators had discovered during the asset forfeiture process. The total recovery eventually reached $512,000, not everything that had been stolen, but enough to fully fund the emergency reserves and complete several deferred maintenance projects. The Willow Creek Estates community was stronger for having gone through the ordeal. Residents were more engaged, board meetings had better attendance, and there was a general culture of accountability that had never existed before. Several other HOAs in the Phoenix area reached out to ask about our oversight procedures, using our experience as a model for improving their own governance. I eventually stepped down as treasurer after 3 years of service, feeling that I had done what I could to help rebuild trust in the HOA. My successor was a retired CPA who brought even more financial expertise to the role and who shared my commitment to transparency. Looking back on everything, I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I had just ignored the discrepancies that night at the quarterly meeting. Deborah, Linda, and Kenneth would probably still be stealing from the community, the emergency reserve fund would be completely depleted, and hundreds of families would continue to be victimized without even knowing it. But I did not ignore it. I asked questions, I demanded answers, and when those answers did not make sense, I kept digging until I found the truth. It cost me time, stress, and peace of mind. It made me enemies and put me at risk. But it also showed me that one person, armed with knowledge and determination, could make a difference. The whole experience reinforced my belief in the importance of financial literacy and civic engagement. Too many people treat HOA finances as someone else's problem, trusting that the board will do the right thing. But as we learned the hard way, unchecked authority inevitably leads to abuse. Every homeowner in an HOA should understand the basics of how their community is funded, where the money goes, and how to access financial records. They should attend meetings, ask questions, and demand transparency. They should verify that reserve funds are actually being maintained and that expenditures match up with visible work being done. These are not complicated principles, but they are vital for preventing the kind of fraud that devastated our community. And while our story had a relatively happy ending, the perpetrators were caught and punished, Most of the money was recovered, and the community reformed its practices. That outcome was far from guaranteed. We were lucky that I happened to have the skills to spot the fraud and the determination to pursue it. Many other communities are not so lucky. I occasionally gave talks to other HOAs about our experience and what they could learn from it. The most important message I tried to convey was simple. Pay attention. Watch where your money goes. Ask questions when things do not make sense. Do not assume that people in positions of authority are acting in your best interest. And if you discover fraud, do not stay silent. Document everything, follow the law, report it to the proper authorities, and be prepared for a fight. The people committing the fraud will not go quietly. They will attack your credibility, try to intimidate you, and do everything in their power to protect themselves. But if you have the evidence and the courage to see it through, justice can prevail. The ceramic gnome still sits by my front door, now joined by a small metal plaque that Sarah gave me for my birthday one year. It reads, "In a world where you can be anything, be the person who asks questions." It is a simple sentiment, but one that captures the essence of everything I learned from the HOA embezzlement case. As I write this, Deborah Mitchell is serving year 3 of her 12-year sentence at a federal correctional facility in California. Linda Carson is in a facility in Texas. Kenneth Huang completed his 5-year sentence last month and is now living in another state, trying to rebuild his life. All 3 of them will carry the weight of their crimes for the rest of their lives, their names forever associated with betrayal and theft. The Willow Creek Estates community, meanwhile, has thrived. Property values have increased, new families have moved in, and there's a sense of pride in how we overcame adversity and built something better. The pool that was supposedly renovated 6 years ago is finally getting real renovations, paid for with properly accounted funds and performed by contractors who were selected through a transparent bidding process. Every time I drive through the neighborhood, I see evidence of the community's resilience. The landscaping is well maintained, the common areas are in good condition, and the emergency reserve fund that started this whole saga sits at a healthy $947,000, exactly where it should be according to our long-term planning. I think about that night in March when I stood up at the quarterly meeting and asked about the missing $340,000. It felt like a small thing at the time, just asking a question that had been bothering me. I had no idea it would lead to federal investigations, criminal trials, prison sentences, and fundamental reforms in how our community was governed. But that is how change often happens, not through grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, but through ordinary people noticing something wrong and having the courage to speak up. The money was being stolen in plain sight, hidden behind vague line items and complicated-sounding explanations. All it took to expose it was someone willing to do the math and ask why the numbers did not add up. My daughter, who was 12 when this all started, is now in high school. She recently told me that she wants to study accounting in college because she was inspired by how I used numbers to fight injustice. I told her that accounting was not just about numbers, it was about truth, accountability, and using your skills to make the world a little bit better. Sarah jokes that I turned a quiet suburban neighborhood into the setting of a crime drama. She is not entirely wrong, but I would do it all again without hesitation. The alternative, letting the fraud continue unchecked, was simply unacceptable. The FBI estimated that if the embezzlement had continued undetected, Deborah and her accomplices would have eventually stolen over $1 million from our community. They would have drained the emergency reserves entirely, leaving us vulnerable to any major repair or disaster. They would have continued imposing special assessments to fund fake projects while pocketing the money, and they would have gotten away with it simply because most people trusted them and did not bother to verify what they were doing. That is the real lesson from this whole experience. Trust is important in any community, but blind trust is dangerous. Verification is not about suspicion or paranoia, it is about responsible stewardship of collective resources. Every homeowner who pays HOA dues has a right and a responsibility to ensure that money is being managed properly. As I look out my front window at the quiet street, the neatly trimmed lawns, and the neighbors going about their daily lives, I feel grateful for the outcome. Grateful that the fraud was caught before it got even worse. Grateful that the legal system worked and the perpetrators faced real consequences. Grateful for the community members who supported me when things got difficult, and grateful for the opportunity to make a difference, even if I never sought that opportunity. The Willow Creek Estates HOA embezzlement case is now a matter of public record, studied by fraud investigators and used as a cautionary tale in HOA management courses. Our story has been told in newspapers, legal journals, and community forums. It serves as both a warning about what can go wrong when oversight fails and an example of how one person's diligence can prevent further harm. I sometimes wonder what Deborah, Linda, and Kenneth think about now, sitting in their prison cells. Do they regret their choices? Do they understand the harm they caused? Do they realize that if they had just done their jobs honestly, they would still be free, still be respected members of the community, still have their reputations intact? Probably not. People who commit fraud generally rationalize their behavior, convincing themselves they deserve the money or that they are not really hurting anyone. But the truth is, they hurt everyone, every homeowner who paid into the system, every family that struggled to come up with special assessment fees, every person who trusted them to do the right thing. The restitution payments will continue for years, garnished from whatever prison wages they earn and any future income they might receive. They will probably never fully repay what they stole, but the attempt matters. It sends a message that actions have consequences and that theft, even from something as mundane as an HOA, is a serious crime deserving of serious punishment. As for me, I have returned to my normal life as a forensic accountant, a husband, a father, and a homeowner. I no longer serve on the HOA board, though I still attend quarterly meetings and review the financial statements. Old habits die hard, and I probably always will be the person who checks the numbers and asks questions when something seems off. The experience changed me in ways both large and small. I am more aware of the importance of community involvement. I'm more willing to speak up when I see something wrong. I'm more appreciative of the legal and law enforcement systems that, despite their flaws, can deliver justice when properly engaged. And I'm more convinced than ever that ordinary citizens have the power to hold bad actors accountable if they are willing to do the work. The sun sets over Willow Creek Estates tonight like it has thousands of times before. Children play in the streets, families gather for dinner, and the community goes about its business. But beneath the surface, things are different now. There is transparency where there was once secrecy. There is accountability where there was once unchecked authority. There is vigilance where there was once blind trust. And sitting by my front door, weathered but still standing, is a small ceramic gnome, a simple decoration that became the first target of retaliation against someone who dared to ask difficult questions. I kept it there intentionally, a private memorial to the moment when everything changed. Every time I see it, I am reminded that speaking truth to power, even in something as mundane as a homeowner association, matters. The emergency reserve fund that started this journey is secure, the community is stronger, the perpetrators are in prison. Justice, however imperfect and delayed, has been served. And I can sleep soundly, knowing that I did the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it was risky, even when it would have been easier to look the way. That is the story of how I exposed $340,000 in HOA embezzlement. Though, as we later learned, the total was much higher. It is a story about numbers and fraud, yes, but more fundamentally, it is a story about integrity, courage, and the responsibility we all have to protect the communities we call home. It is a reminder that corruption thrives in the dark and withers in the light, and that sometimes all it takes to bring that light is one person willing to ask a simple question: where did the money go?